Welcome to African Tales by Glarenzo. Here, we bring the rich, vibrant stories of Africa to life, one tale at a time. If you love exploring culture, history, and timeless adventures, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and share. Today's story is titled Shadows of Desire. It is about a married lady, Antonia, and her sexcapade with different men in camp. Antonia sat on her bed, staring at the crisp, white NYSC uniform laid out before her. Her heart was a blend of excitement and unease. She had finally been called up for her mandatory National Youth Service, but the circumstances were far from ideal. She had recently married Yemi, her loving and devoted husband, barely 3 months ago. While Yemi was a loving husband, his passion was not enough to quench Antonia's hunger for something more. She felt suffocated by the monotonous routines of domestic life, the same steady rhythm that kept her home. The opportunity she had been waiting for to serve her country finally arrived, and she saw it as a chance for freedom, an opportunity to explore her wild desires once again, since she was posted to a state different from where she resided with her husband. Yemi had hoped she would be posted to his state, where he worked as an engineer, but due to the chaos of their rushed union, her documents were incomplete. Now, she was headed to a distant state, alone. But even before Yemi came into the picture, Antonia had a history with him. She had gotten pregnant by him when they were still in their early 20s. At the time, they hadn't been married, just two young people caught up in the whirlwind of life, love, and mistakes. Their child, a boy named Femi, was the result of their unplanned romance. Though they didn't marry immediately, Yemi had been a responsible father, staying involved in the child's life and supporting both Antonia and Femi. When Antonia found out she was pregnant, she had been devastated, but Yemi assured her that they would figure it out. They had eventually decided to marry, believing that it was the right thing to do for their child. Yet, even with the birth of Femi and their eventual marriage, Antonia never fully adjusted to the responsibilities of motherhood. She loved her son, of course, but the idea of being tied down to one place, to one man, was something that gnawed at her sense of freedom. At the camp, the youthful energy was intoxicating. The young men around her had an air of adventure that she hadn't realized she missed. On the first night, she met Deli. He was tall, confident, and had the kind of energy that reminded Antonia of the wild nights she once lived. The instant attraction was undeniable. They had sex that night, and it was everything Antonia craved, wildly excited, urgent, and raw. But the next day, as the excitement wore off, Antonia felt an emptiness again. Deli didn't satisfy her deeper cravings. He was just another fling, another face in the crowd. So, she moved on, searching for more, until she met Ibuka, a charming guy with a rough edge that made her feel alive. He was a little more adventurous, more wild, but still, he wasn't enough. After a few days, Antonia felt the hunger grow again, a gnawing need for something darker, something that would really push her limits. It wasn't long before Ibuka began to bore her, his touch no longer thrilling. That was when West entered the picture. West was a soldier stationed at the camp, tasked with maintaining order. He was older, ruggedly handsome, and carried himself with a commanding presence. West, despite his strict exterior, was just as reckless as she was. Again, even he couldn't match her energy. Then she met Jide. He was rough, unpredictable, and had the dangerous aura of someone who lived on the edge. Antonia felt an immediate connection. This time, when they slept together, it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was satisfying, unlike anything she had ever craved. She felt herself surrender to him completely. Antonia's journey through the NYSC camp had begun with excitement, but it quickly spiraled into something darker than she could have ever imagined. After that first night with Jide, everything seemed to change. His presence lingered in her mind, the intensity of their connection pulling her deeper into a spiral she couldn't control. Jide, with his dangerous edge, had a way of making everything feel thrilling. He introduced her to a world she had never known before, hard drugs and sex enhancement pills that heightened the physical experience, blurring the lines between pleasure and oblivion. Antonia, once hesitant, quickly succumbed to the temptation. With Jide, every night felt like a new adventure, one that promised to satisfy her insatiable cravings for excitement and release. Despite her brief time in camp, Antonia had already felt the pull of addiction, not just to the drugs, but to the wild, reckless passion that Jide had awakened in her. When her time in camp ended and she was redeployed back to her home state, where her husband Yemi lived, she felt an undeniable sense of loss. Yemi had been nothing but supportive of her, always loving and patient, but Antonia's desire for something more, something wilder, had consumed her. She lied to him that she was still working on her redeployment, and to that effect she would be staying back for an extra week before it could be finalized. Deep inside, Antonia knew she was making a choice to remain distant, to keep chasing the high that Jide and the drugs gave her. Yemi's calls grew more frequent, filled with concern and confusion, but Antonia pushed him away. She convinced herself that her need for freedom and excitement was more important than the quiet, predictable life she had with him and their son, Femi. Jide, sensing her addiction and need for more, made arrangements for his friends to join in their sexcapades. He promised her that it would be a night to remember, a night that would push all of her boundaries. She was hesitant at first, but the thrill of it all was too much to resist. This time, it would be different. She had done it with Jide before, but now there would be others. The thought sent a thrill through her that she couldn't ignore. Antonia knew that what they were doing was dangerous, but the craving for more, the craving for the wildness and thrill that filled her veins and clouded her mind, was stronger than any ounce of caution she had left. She was lost in it. The night came, and Jide brought 3 of his friends, men who were just as rough and reckless as he was. The drugs had already started to take their toll on Antonia. Her mind was hazy, her body floating in a state of euphoria, but she didn't care. She wanted it. She wanted the chaos, the pleasure, the abandon. The experience was overwhelming, each of them pushing her limits, and she felt herself spiraling deeper into the dark abyss of her own desires. But then, something shifted. The drugs, the pills, and the relentless passion began to blur her sense of reality. She felt dizzy, her vision spinning, her body growing weak. Her heart raced as panic set in. She pleaded for them to stop, her voice shaky, her body fighting against the overwhelming sensations. She begged them to let her go, to slow down, but it was as if they couldn't hear her, or perhaps they didn't care. "Please, stop," she cried, her voice trembling with desperation. "I can't take it anymore. Please." But they ignored her pleas, continuing to push her further than she had ever imagined she would go. The ecstasy, once intoxicating, was now a nightmare she couldn't escape. The drugs coursed through her veins, making it harder to think, to feel anything but the weight of her own fear. She felt herself losing control, slipping away into a state of utter helplessness. When it was over, the room spun violently around her. The high had turned into something cold, something heavy that pressed against her chest. The exhilaration she once craved was now replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness. The thrill had disappeared, leaving only the harsh reality of what she had just experienced. Antonia lay there, her body trembling, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't make sense of anything. The coldness of the situation settled deep in her chest, and she realized too late the price she had paid for her reckless desires. She had crossed a line she could never return from. The night had promised pleasure, but instead, it had left her broken. And in that cold, hollow silence, Antonia knew that the thrill she had sought had come at the cost of her soul. In the morning, when they found her lifeless body, no one could understand how a young woman who had so much to live for had ended up like this. Her family, her husband, and her son left behind with no answers, only the shattered pieces of a life that was consumed by reckless desire. Back at home, the room was heavy with silence, broken only by soft sobs. Antonia lay still, her lifeless body a painful reminder of choices that could not be undone. Yemi clutched her hand, tears streaming down his face, while Femi stood frozen, his young eyes wide with grief. Light fell cruelly on their shattered faces, illuminating the depth of their loss. In her absence, only Sarah remained, a lasting testament to the cost of her reckless decisions. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and turn on notification for more captivating stories.